So welcome back to episode 4 of A Saint a Week, and this week we have the life of Saint Cuthbert of Lindisfarne. Saint Cuthbert was born around 634 in Dunbar. He was a monk, hermit, bishop and miracle worker, and one of the most revered saints of early medieval Britain, known for his life of deep prayer, strict discipline and extraordinary miracles. Cuthbert sought solitude with God, yet became a spiritual leader to kings, monks and common people alike. Even after his death, his influence only grew, with reports of healings and wonders surrounding his tomb. In this video, we're going to explore the accounts told in the life of St. Cuthbert by the Venerable Bede. And also just a personal note here, Lindisfarne is very close to where I live in the northeast of England, and having visited there many times in the Holy Island, it's only now I've realised the importance and the significance of the area, so it's quite special to read about this. Now, straight away in the book, we are told that Cuthbert was inspired by the words of Jeremiah. It is good for a man to bear the yoke from his youth. He shall sit alone and be silent, for he shall rise above himself. Cuthbert, the man of God, was from an early age bowed himself to the discipline of monastic life. He embraced the life of a hermit and gladly lived apart for a considerable time. He delighted in the sweetness of divine meditation and kept silent from ordinary human conversation. So the book starts where Cuthbert is around age 8, and we're told that he was a boy who enjoyed doing things boys that age would do, playing games and various sports, and often being very competitive in wanting to win all the time in these endeavours. At that time, we're told that Cuthbert did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. On one of the days, some of the boys were playing games in a field, and many had gathered there, including Cuthbert. Suddenly, a very young boy ran up to him and firmly told him not to waste his time in idle games and foolishness, but to develop the powers of his mind as well as his body. Cuthbert brushed off the advice, naturally, and the little boy immediately fell to the ground and began to weep bitterly. Why, holy Cuthbert, priest and bishop, do you give yourself to things that are so unworthy of your nature and calling? It is not fitting for you to play among children when the Lord has appointed you to teach virtue even to those older than yourself. And it says in the book, we should not be surprised that God could correct the light-heartedness of a child through the mouth of another child, as he once even made an animal speak to rebuke the foolishness of a prophet. Truly it is said, the praise of him, out of the mouths of babes and infants, you have perfected praise. In the next chapter, we hear of an angel who visits Cuthbert, and that just shows a further confirmation of his calling. But as we move on into the book, we come across the first miracle that Cuthbert facilitates. So many years later, he comes by a local monastery near the River Tyne. Members of the monastery had left via ship to collect timber from a nearby location, when all of a sudden the winds had changed, the seas became violent, and the ships began to drift further away. Some of the monks on land at once turned to God. Leaving the monastery, they gathered on a rocky point near where the ships were being tossed about in the sea. There they knelt and prayed earnestly to the Lord for those in such immediate danger of destruction. Yet God did not immediately answer their fervent prayers. This delay, no doubt, was meant to show the power of Cuthbert's prayers. Now a crowd had gathered around the monks and had begun mocking them. Cuthbert replied, "Those whom you see in such danger, would it not be better and more humane to pray to the Lord for them rather than to take pleasure in their misfortune?" Cuthbert knelt down and bowed his head to the ground in prayer. Immediately, the force of the wind was checked, the sea and the ships calmed. The ships with their crews rejoiced, and were driven safely ashore near the monastery, exactly where they had intended to land. And the country people, it says, were ashamed of their unbelief and praised Cuthbert's faith on the spot. continued to speak highly of him afterward. Now at this point, Cuthbert is still working as a shepherd in the hills and had not yet given his full life to monastery. So we are told Cuthbert had already begun to devote himself seriously to prayer. One night, while the other shepherds slept, he remained awake praying. During the night, he saw a brilliant shaft of light break through the darkness. In the light, a company of angels descended to earth, received a radiant soul, and carried it back up into heaven. Cuthbert understood that he was witnessing the soul of a man being welcomed into eternal glory. Deeply moved by the vision, he praised God and urged his companions not to waste their lives in idleness, but to remain spiritually watchful. He told them that while he prayed, he had seen heaven opened and a holy servant of God brought into the presence of Christ. The next morning, he learned that Aidan, the holy Bishop of Lindisfarne, had died at that very hour. Realising that the vision marked Aidan's passing into heaven, Cuthbert felt called to dedicate his own life fully to God. He immediately gave up his work as a shepherd and resolved to enter a monastery, beginning his formal religious life. We then read that he was very aware of the holy reputation of Lindisfarne, but he was felt especially drawn to the renowned monk priest Boysil at the monastery of Melrose. As he arrived, Boysil, standing at the monastery door, immediately perceived in spirit what Cuthbert would become and declared, "Behold, a servant of the Lord." This prophetic recognition marked the beginning of Cuthbert's formal spiritual formation. Once he was admitted among the brethren, from the outset, he did not merely conform to monastic discipline. He sought to excel in it. In reading, manual labour, prayer, fasting, and vigils, he surpassed the others. His natural physical strength enabled him to endure rigorous practices, though he practiced moderation in food so as to not weaken his body for work. And upon reading this myself, I'm in a particular situation where I'm starting to try to understand fasting more and get better at it, and more consistent. And one thing that is, very obvious is that everyone's fasting rule is different. Yes, we are expected to fast, as it says in the Bible, but whereas someone of a larger build might be able to withstand food much longer, someone of a smaller stature may be able to miss one meal to start, 2 meals. But I guess the most important thing is seeking advice from a spiritual father if you are looking to start fasting or understand more about fasting. Now moving on, we are told years later, when a new monastery was founded, Cuthbert was among the monks sent there under Abbot Eater. And during this time we hear of another visitation from an angel, furthering his call. We also begin to hear more about his authority, which was quietly growing in the area and was rooted in service. Now, during a widespread plague where Cuthbert fell gravely ill, the monks prayed secretly for him through the night, believing his presence essential to them. Upon learning of their prayers, Cuthbert immediately rose from his sickbed, convinced God would not disregard their intercession. And at this moment as well, Boysil was also nearing death, and he summoned Cuthbert for final instruction. For 7 days they read and meditated on the gospel, further preparing Cuthbert for his spiritual journey. During those 7 days, Boysil foretold Cuthbert's future, including that he would one day become a bishop. Cuthbert did not welcome this prophecy. Even later, as a hermit, he would confess fear of falling into the love of riches and power, which I think all of us on a deep level fear. The possibility of him becoming a bishop troubled him deeply. Thus his leadership was prophetically announced long before it was realised, and he met it not with ambition, but with hesitation. After Boysil's death, Cuthbert assumed greater responsibility within the monastery. He became not merely a disciplined monk, but a public spiritual leader. He began travelling beyond monastic walls to preach among the surrounding villages. At a time when many Christians have fallen into moral laxity or superstition, Cuthbert laboured to restore sound faith. He often travelled on horseback or on foot to remote areas and settlements, to impoverished and neglected regions, and often remained there for weeks at a time. People were drawn not only by his words, it says, but by his evident holiness. Many believed nothing could be hidden from him and confessed openly their faults. Leadership now moved from personal asceticism to active shepherding. Now in the book we read, in between these parts, we also read of various miracles which happened or Cuthbert facilitated. Again, please go read the book. It's very, very valuable. But we move on to a miracle, or we hear of a miraculous night Cuthbert spent in the sea. And take it from me, someone who lives in the northeast of England, the sea is very, very cold. Even on a summer's day, it's freezing cold, so this is even more impressive. In this chapter, Cuthbert visits the monastery at Colludi, responding to their request for spiritual guidance. While staying there, he continues his habitual practice of intense night prayer. As was his custom, he left the monastery secretly while others slept in order to pray alone. And one night, a curious brother followed him to see what he did. Cuthbert went down to the sea and stood in the freezing water up to his neck and arms, spending the entire night in prayer and praise. At dawn, he came out of the water and knelt again on the shore to continue praying. As he continued praying, 2 otters emerged from the sea. They approached him, lay at his feet, and breathe upon them to warm him, and drying them with their fur, that is his feet. After receiving his blessing, they returned to the sea. This scene, it reveals nature itself honouring Cuthbert's holiness, which is a common theme, an occurrence throughout the book and his life. The person or the observing brother, overwhelmed with fear and awe, later fell at Cuthbert's feet and begged forgiveness for secretly following him. Cuthbert gently forgave him, but required that he not reveal what he had witnessed until after his death. In doing so, he imitated Christ's instruction after the transfiguration, keeping miraculous glory hidden during his lifetime. The miracle remained concealed while Cuthbert lived, and only after his death was it made known. Now, Cuthbert's prophetic and miraculous authority continues to grow as he demonstrates complete trust in God's providence and power over nature and evil. When stranded by storms without food, he confidently prays, finds miraculously prepared food, and foretells the exact day calm weather will return, which happens as predicted. On another journey, he assures his companion that God will provide, and an eagle delivers a fish. Cuthbert insists they share it even with the bird, showing both faith and humility. In the next chapters as well, we hear while preaching, he perceives a demonic attempt to distract the people through a false supernatural fire. By prayer, he dispels the illusion and exposes the devil's interference. And later, he extinguishes a real village fire simply through prayer, demonstrating spiritual authority over physical elements. And finally, he casts out a demon who is afflicting a woman, even before physically reaching her, revealing both prophetic insight and dominion over evil spirits in the name of Christ. The woman is instantly restored, confirming his holiness and divine favour. After years of disciplined formation, Cuthbert was transferred by Abbot Eater to the monastery of Lindisfarne, where he would take on a greater role in shaping the spiritual life of the community. Lindisfarne was not simply a monastery, but also a bishopric, following the model established by Aidan of Lindisfarne, where even the bishop lived under monastic rule. Leadership there was rooted not in status but in a shared discipline, and Cuthbert arrived not as a ruler but as a teacher of monastic perfection. At Lindisfarne, his authority grew through example. He instructed the brethren in prayer, obedience, and simplicity, but some resisted stricter reforms, preferring older customs. And Cuthbert responded not with force, but with patience. His leadership was marked by steadiness, humility, and an interior peace that made clear his strength came from prayer rather than personality. Even while guiding the monastery, Cuthbert continued his missionary journeys among the surrounding villages. He preached in remote and impoverished places, healed the sick, and cast out demons. His influence extended far beyond the cloister walls, yet his growing reputation only deepened his private asceticism. He was known to remain awake for nights at a time in prayer, sometimes walk in the island to fight off sleep. As his spiritual life intensified, so did his longing for solitude. After years of communal leadership, he sought permission to withdraw from the world more completely. He chose a barren and wind-swept island called Farne Island, a place which long believed to be inhabited by evil spirits and feared by other people. There, through prayer and fasting, he was said to have driven out demonic forces and claimed the island for God. Over time, he reduced contact with visitors, speaking to them only through a window, and eventually closing even that except for moments of blessings. Cuthbert's journey during these years reveals a clear progression from disciplined monk to patient reformer, from spiritual father to solitary ascetic. His leadership at Lindisfarne was forged in humility and perseverance. His retreat to Farne Island was not an escape from responsibility, but its culmination. Having guided others outwardly, he now sought to conquer the last inner strongholds of distraction and attachment. The deeper his influence grew, the more radically he withdrew, demonstrating that for Cuthbert, true authority was born not from power, but from prayer. As Cuthbert lived in solitude, his reputation for holiness spread across Britain. People came to him for guidance, confession, healing, and none left without comfort. Though many recognised his prophetic gift, he remained humble and fearful of higher office, especially when reminded of a prophecy that he would one day become a bishop. He foretold the death of King Egfrith of Northumbria and predicted his successor. Soon after, at a church synod led by Theodore of Tarsus, Cuthbert was chosen as a Bishop of Lindisfarne. He resisted strongly, preferring solitude, but finally accepted when the king and bishops pleaded with him. As bishop, he lived simply and continued his monastic discipline. He cared for the poor, preached faithfully, performed healings, and guided people with humility. His early prophecy was fulfilled when King Egfrith was killed in battle at the very hour Cuthbert had foreseen. This chapter recounts the final illness and death of Cuthbert, who, after returning to his island cell following Christmas, foretells that he would not only return when his body is brought back. Soon after, he falls gravely ill and endures 3 weeks of suffering with patience and spiritual strength, seeing his pain as preparation for eternal life. During 5 days of isolation caused by bad weather, he survives only on a few onions, remaining steadfast despite physical weakness and spiritual trials. He calmly gives detailed instructions for his burial and expresses his wish to be buried upon his island, though he eventually permits the monks to lay him to rest inside the monastery church. Throughout, he shows humility, discipline, and complete trust in God, facing death peacefully and thoughtfully. Towards the end, Cuthbert gives his final instructions to the brethren as he lies dying in his oratory. Though weakened by suffering, he urges them to live in peace, humility, unity, and divine charity, encouraging harmony both among themselves and with others faithful Christians. He advises them to show hospitality and kindness, but firmly warns against associating with those who stray from the unity of the faith. He even declares that it would be better to leave their home and carry his bones elsewhere than to compromise with schism or false teaching. Confident that his life and teaching will be better understood after his death, he spends his remaining hours in prayer and watchfulness. At evening, he receives the Holy Communion, strengthening himself spiritually for death, and then lifting his eyes and hands toward heaven in prayer, peacefully yields his soul to God. Well, the life of St. Cuthbert of Lindisfarne began as a shepherd boy who had visions of a calling to monastic life, a path that would ultimately lead him to become one of the great saints of the early church. At Melrose, he became known for discipline, preaching, and pastoral care. At Lindisfarne, he strengthened monastic observance and taught by personal example. Seeking deeper devotion, he withdrew to the island of Farne, where he lived in strict solitude, marked by prayer, fasting, and reporting miracles involving nature, healing, and spiritual warfare. And though he preferred isolation, he was elected bishop. As bishop, he maintained a monastic simplicity while actively teaching, correcting, healing, and caring for the poor. He was also regarded as having prophetic insight. Sensing his end, he returned to solitude. He died in prayer after giving final instruction, emphasizing unity, peace, and fidelity to the faith. Following his burial at Lindisfarne, miracles were reported at his tomb. 9 years later, his body was found incorrupt, strengthening his reputation for sanctity. Devotion to him expanded, and his shrine became a major spiritual centre. And his life overall presents a consistent model of obedience, ascetic discipline, pastoral responsibility, and lasting spiritual influence beyond death. So yeah, that concludes episode 4. Thanks for watching. It's a slightly longer episode, but as you can see, a lot of value here. I'll also leave the books, the online books below, so you can check out where I read about this amazing saint. So yeah, thanks for watching, and see you next week. Stay blessed.